During my early 20s, I worked as a meter reader in Iowa City, Iowa. A meter reader is a person who records how much electricity, gas, or water that you've used during each month. If your meters are on the inside and you want an accurate bill, a meter reader must enter your home whether you're there to let them in or not. Entering a home when the owner isn't present is something that I never got used to, no matter how loudly I knocked, how obvious I made it. I never shook that uneasy feeling that I was not welcome. A home's exterior is just the projection of ourselves to the world. But the further that you venture inside, the closer you come to seeing truly what kind of person lives there. And if you want the raw, unfiltered truth, head to the basement. I hate basements. I've seen walls that looked like giant, static-filled TV screens. I've seen roaches scurrying around a white background, cobwebs so thick and dusty that it looks as though there's been an explosion at a cotton candy machine factory filled with spiders. I've seen rats, snakes, weapons, neglected children, abused pets, squatters, massive hoards, bizarre items, meth labs. Heck, I even saw a coffin once. There's rational explanations to all of these things. Well, not all of them. But there was one basement where what I found was beyond the grasp of logic. That's what made it so terrifying. It was an old apartment home. Now from the outside, it looked like every other home on the block. I entered the back door and found myself to the top of a staircase. I ran my hand along the wall until I grazed the light switch. I flipped the switch, but no lights come on. I wasn't carrying a flashlight. A typical routine involved 5 or 6 hours of walking alone. I carried as little as possible. Oftentimes, I used the light from my handheld screen, but it only illuminated whatever was about a foot in front. So armed with the world's worst lantern, I stepped into the darkness. Once I made it to the bottom, I blindly shuffled across the room, one baby step at a time. With arms outstretched and head down, I eventually reached the other side of the basement. I shined the dim light from my handheld along the wall. I discovered that there were 2 doors. Each door led into its own smaller room. I chose the door on the right and found the meters in the far corner. As I entered, I started reading. I began to hear noises coming from the other room. Something was moving. There was whimpering that grew louder and louder the longer that I listened and stayed there. I eventually realized that it was a dog. It sounded weak, distressed. I tried to open the door. It's locked. At this point, the dog was scratching the other side of the door too. I felt helpless. I reported it when I got back to the office, but I could not shake the thought of the dog. It stuck with me for over a month, until the next return. So there I was, 1 month later, back within the basement that I kind of dreaded now. At least this time I knew where the meters were. I shuffled back into the little room on the right when I kept my ears open for any sounds coming from the other room. This time though, I didn't hear anything. I read the meters and started making my way back, but I could not shake the memory of that dog. Was it still trapped inside the room? My curiosity got the best of me. I stood outside the door for a few moments, listening. Nothing. That's when I made a huge mistake. I tried to open the door. I had no more than jiggled the door a little bit and then I heard it. Screams. Blood-curdling screams. Unlike anything that I've ever heard in my life. Sounds that I don't think a human was capable of producing. Short, piercing, high-pitched shrieks followed abruptly by a low, drawn-out, guttering moaning sound that ultimately morphed into something that I can only describe as crying, but much, much louder. It was all over the place. Truly psychotic in nature. Harrowing to say the very least. I stumbled backwards. I nearly lost my balance. I shouted something like, "Hello? Who's there?" There was nothing. Just the screams. "Are you okay? You need help?" Still, no response, only screams. Now there was no doubt that I yelled loud enough for him to hear me. He didn't want my help. He wanted me gone. I fumbled my way through the darkened room towards the exit. I reached the top of the stairs. I just stand there, listening. I was trying to wrap my mind around what I was hearing. I waited for the screaming to stop, but it never did. When I finally left, it was still just as loud, and just as terrifying as it sounded in the first place. I felt relieved, but that quickly vanished when I realized that I had to do it all over again the next month. I reported what I had heard, but nothing come of it. As my return drew nearer, a sense of dread grew inside me. What kind of lunatic sits alone in total darkness and silence? My mind created endless explanations for what kind of hell laid beyond that door. By the time I returned, I'd built him up so much in my mind that it could only be the devil himself down there. Anything else would be a letdown. There was no sign of him for the next month, even several months. I'd nearly given up on solving the mystery, when a stroke of luck pulled me back in. One night, I went to see a concert with my friend Laura. After the show, I gave her a ride home. She moved somewhat recently. She had to give me directions. I didn't pay that much attention to where she was leading until she pointed out a home ways up in the street. I couldn't believe it. She just moved into the mystery home with that weird room in the basement. This sounds weird, but have you ever noticed anything odd about the basement at this? Before I could finish, she said, "A crazy guy lives down there." Finally, I had confirmation. She went on to tell me that, even though her apartment was in the attic, she often heard him yelling late at night. But that wasn't all. She actually met him. One day, while walking to her car, she said she saw him standing in the lawn. He stood perfectly still, with no expression on his face. He was directly in her path, so she cautiously made her way around him. She noticed he was staring at her, so she had offered a friendly hi. To this, he had no reaction, except for one unsettling exception. He stuck out his tongue, then quickly sucked it in his mouth and resumed acting like a statue. Thoroughly creeped out, she got in her car and drove away. 2 or 3 months later, she finally met himself. I entered the back door like I had so many times before. This time, something was different. There was a light on in the basement. I peered down the staircase. At the bottom, a ragged-looking dog was staring back at me. It was the same dog that I'd heard during my first visit. Then, I realized something else. Behind the dog, I can see some bare feet. The ceiling blocked my view for the rest of whoever was standing there. It didn't matter. I knew it's him. I should have right then, but I didn't. I know this probably doesn't make sense, but at this point, my desire to finally get some answers outweighed my fear. I shakily called out, "Meter reader," and started to make my descent. As I made my way down, more of him was revealed. He looked to be middle-aged. His head was shaved. His eyes were wild. He was wearing pants but with no shirt. What I remembered the most was just how lean and weird his body looked. He had the look of a body that was never at rest. I explained who I was and what I was doing there. To my surprise, not only did he talk, but he actually sounded somewhat normal. The volume and pitch of his voice was odd, but he said the same sort of things that people typically said to meter readers. I even started to doubt whether or not this was the same man that I heard screaming, but his behaviour slowly removed all doubt that I had. As I read the meters, he rapidly paced back and forth. He was constantly wiggling his hands together and sporadically cocking his head from side to side. The longer he spoke, the more agitated he became. He started these really weird verbal tics. Every so often, he'd blurt out a really loud sound in the middle of a sentence. He was trying to suppress these, but he was losing the battle. As I started to make my way towards the exit, he followed. His verbal outbursts grew louder and louder and more frequent. I was petrified. When I reached the stairs, I drew our conversation to an end and said goodbye. As I turned my head to the staircase, he could no longer hold it in. Screams. The very same unforgettable screams that I'd heard coming from a few months back. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could, flung the door open and rushed into the daylight. A month or two later, I had a couple of friends over to my place. I was excited to tell her about my encounter, but as I was relaying what happened, I could tell that something was on her mind. When I finished telling the story, she told me about something that she had seen a couple of weeks earlier. One day, she noticed lights flashing outside her window. She looked outside just in time to see the police officers placing the man from the basement into the back seat of a cop car. She later found out from another tenant that he had brutally attacked somebody with a weapon. That was the last that she ever saw of him. I don't know what come of the man in the basement. I like to think that he got the help that he so desperately needed. So this story takes place over one summer when I was 14 years old. It was around 11 PM. I was on my bedroom computer. I'd just gotten home. I was living with my brother at the time because my parents were in Florida for a while, so me and my brother were the only ones home, and the only ones who had access to the home. I needed a photo of myself or something. I don't remember what for, but I opened my camera roll. Immediately, my whole body froze. I couldn't move. I immediately closed the camera roll and sat in my bed for a while. I began shaking. Tears of fright come over my eyes. I gained the courage to open the camera roll to look again. I stared at the photo for at least 10 minutes, feeling more uneasy with every second that passed. I checked the time of the picture, and that made me even more distressed. The picture was taken at 9:45 p.m. What made it worse was that me and my brother were both gone by 8 to get dinner. No one was home alone to take the picture. Afraid to leave my room, I picked up my phone and messaged my brother. I told him that I was so scared, I couldn't move, and if he would come here. He said to me what's wrong, and I sent him the picture from my computer along with what happened. Him, thinking it was a joke, laughed and told me good night. Me not joking, I called him. He could obviously hear me crying and started questioning me. I told him to come to my room. He did so. He entered my room with a golf club for protection. At this point, we're both terrified, staring at a blurry picture of a man we did not recognize. We decided to go check out the home to see if anyone was there. So we proceeded to swipe through all 4 floors of the home. We didn't see anything sketchy on the top 3 floors. We walked down to the basement. We walked down, and my brother leaded the way. "Crap," he whispered. I looked to the back corner of our basement where the cellar door that leads to the outside is. The door and the hatch that covered the steps were both open. After this happened, we called the police and showed them the picture and told them the story. They told us to lock our doors and call them if we heard or saw anything. Great, we thought. We locked the doors and both sat in the room for the rest of the night. Whoever was in our home and on my computer must have opened my computer and opened the camera accidentally. He must have accidentally pressed the spacebar while the camera was open in the background and got a picture of him. I still wonder why somebody would have just broken into the house for no reason. Nothing was stolen, no drawers or cabinets were touched. Nothing seemed to be out of place. My brother ended up moving out of the home for a few days after, in fear that the guy would come back. Not too far from where I live, there are a series of roads called Kirby. I call them hell. My friends and I caught wind of the legends and stories that come from Kirby Road, and decided that we just had to explore them. Being young and stupid, we spent a lot of weekends driving around these roads, always on the search for the next thrill. At times, we'd find something we couldn't face in the dark, and we would go back to explore it during the daytime, but we'd never stumble upon the same place twice, although it was not for a lack of trying. In fact, this story is only because of our determination to see the same part of hell twice. Our trip began with 3, myself, my best friend, and one that we'll just call Chris. We headed towards hell with the hopes of stumbling across a place we had found before, an abandoned and tagged with warning signs barn with nooses tied across whatever rafters remained. But as I stated before, you'll never go to the same part twice. After an hour of driving, we noticed a barn located down a hidden drive surrounded by a cornstalk. It didn't take long to realize that this was not the place. Normally, we would have left, but we didn't. I noticed a pile of body shapes in the barn. If you've seen Japanese creepers, you know what I'm talking about. Sack-like material wrapped over a body, tied at the neck, against the waist, and finally around the ankles. Now imagine a pile with 50 or more. Despite our chances of becoming an addition, we ventured inside. I'm happy to admit that we were wrong with our assumption of a pile of dead bodies. However, discovering what was wrapped up was unnerving. Jesus and Mary everywhere. The pile was just beginning. On the second level, there were Jesus's and Mary parts. The heads felt as though they were watching you. Despite the Jesus pieces, Chris was hell-bent on making it into the old ladder that sat in the furthest part of the barn, and we did our best until my best friend tripped on a latch hidden beneath the hay. A quick kick revealed the door. Within minutes, her and Chris went down while I kept a watch. Hidden under this door was a small ladder that led you to a stable-like compartment. I'd say they were about half the size of a normal keep for a horse, but what would normally be opened for a horse to keep its head out was covered by bars. Each stable had a lock. They were filling me in as they went in, not knowing much about barns or horse keep. All seemed normal, until I asked where the doors were, down towards the exit and entrance of this. There wasn't one. Obviously, this was a cellar full of horse stables, stables which were useless for horses. We had enough. The wrapped up statues were creepy, but the stables, that did it for us. They then practically flew up the stairs and we headed out quick. I was a bit more weary going out than in, keeping my eyes on the ground to avoid tripping on whatever was hidden under the hay. What I saw beneath my foot stopped me instantly. There were pictures. Everywhere. Anywhere the hay was disturbed, there was another picture to be seen. Every single picture that I glanced at was of a lone woman. Every single picture was different, a different female. Picture after picture of individual women, none of which were smiling for the camera. Of course, I didn't stay to confirm. I grabbed one picture and ran off. We never went back. I never found out what was actually going on there. To be honest, I don't want to know. When I was about 15, I got really sick with bronchitis for about 2 weeks. One snowy morning during that time period, I was home alone with my younger brother. I was laying on the living room couch with him, sitting on the floor next to me, watching TV. We started to hear some strange sounds from the basement, but I shrugged it off, figuring that it's probably just a furnace or pipes. The home was from the 1800s, but the sounds grew louder and louder. I was beginning to get sufficiently creeped out. I wasn't trying to say anything to my brother because I didn't want to alarm him. Now I should probably explain my setup a little here. There was a hallway off the living room that contained the bathroom and basement door. From there, We're sitting in the living room. I could see the basement door clearly, and in the basement there was a door that led to the backyard, but it was a pretty difficult place to get to. So I was sitting and watching the door because I was purely paranoid at this point. All of a sudden, I heard and saw the doorknob move ever so slightly. I jumped up and told my brother to grab the landline so I could call our mum. She told us to put a chair in front of the basement door and call the police immediately. I did just that, and they were on their way. The doorknob moved a few more times, as well as some strange tapping sounds and knocking. It's pretty safe to say that we were terrified. Now we sat there quietly and watched the door the entire time. When the cops arrived, we discovered there were big footprints in the snow going towards our driveway and back out to the backyard. They looked around but they didn't find anything. Even to this day, I have no idea who they were or what they wanted. When I was about 13, this nice family moved out of their home in Prescott Country Club, Dewey, Arizona, just down from the block from my family. A strange guy moved in. The condition of the property rapidly deteriorated. The day he moved in, he had a large U-Haul type truck. This was fine, but it never left. The truck remained there, parked in the driveway. It also had an extension cord running from the home to the truck. I thought this was weird. Eventually, there were paint cans all over the yard. Random junk on one side of the home, a real mess. This was not welcome in the small community, but anybody who talked to the guy said he come across as really weird, and he warned them to tread lightly. I mowed lawns and was hired to do our friend's lawn while they were on an extended vacation. They lived next to the weird guy. Every day when I was sweating myself in the morning, I could see this weirdo spying on me through the blinds in his living room. He wasn't very good at hiding. Now fast forward 2 years, and my family is watching the 5 PM news while eating dinner, and they start reporting on a developing case where a woman's frozen body was found inside a freezer inside a truck. They showed the home and we all went silent. I ran outside and looked down the street. Sure enough, every news agency in the state had a truck parked in the street, satellite dish extended, cops had everything cordoned off. The guy abducted a woman, murdered her and did other terrible things before, stored her body in a freezer, which eventually went into the truck and was driven to AZ.